hi, we're from security. You're going to stop doing everything else you're doing and do what we say now.
So they haven't adopted the whole DevOps firewall management thing then, huh?
We've always done it this way.
So what would you say you do here? Oh, you want to do a podcast?
Sure.
Today is February 15th, 2015, and this is episode 106 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Happy Sunday evening to you, sir.
Likewise. So just a reminder, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So we've got quite a lot of news to cover this week.
Yeah, it's been a good news week.
Absolutely. Better than it has been in quite some time. So the first thing that we'll just very briefly touch on is a report that came out of the PCI Council. And this report basically says that they're going to be releasing PCI 3.1 imminently. I don't think they've really given a time frame yet. And one of the requirements in that change is going to be that SSL, all versions of SSL are no longer considered safe for conducting or securing credit card transactions. And, I guess I've heard that there may be some confusion, but, of course, TLS, the implication there is that you should be using TLS, not SSL. So
I find it interesting because it's an out-of-cycle release from PCI. As far as I know, it's the first time they've ever done this.
I haven't heard one way or the other, but that is an interesting thing because they made a lot of hay about their pretty rigid release cycle.
So, yeah, I guess, here's the other thing that I think about. This may not be the last time we have one of these sorts of major protocol problems. So if I'm in the world where I need to care heavily about PCI compliance and securing traffic around PCI, I might want to figure out a way that I can easily retrofit in the future. Because I've heard tell of a lot of embedded systems that are using SSL that are going to have hardware replaced to truly meet this sort of requirement. And maybe we should be a little smarter about future-proofing those devices.
I think that's a really good point.
It's much easier said than done. But, these sorts of protocols do age out over time. We've seen it with our hashes functions, our salting functions, our key lengths. These things do evolve as CPU time gets cheaper. So with that in mind, how do you think we should design this sort of functionality to easily rip and replace? Maybe, kind of the bottom line there.
Yeah, but I think you hit on an interesting point, and that is that there's a lot of technology out there that it's both at a consumer, particularly a small business level, but even components of enterprise equipment, which is what I'll call disposable. They're not intended to really be upgraded, or it's very unlikely that the manufacturer may upgrade it. And I'm thinking things like the lights out management cards and that sort of thing, which you may never see an upgrade, and so you have to ask the question, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and maybe that's just the decision that manufacturers make. Maybe they say, hey, it's cheaper for us to replace it down the line than it is to make it upgradable in the field. And maybe that's a viable decision.
Well, I mean, if you're a manufacturer, of course that's better because that involves your customer buying new stuff.
Yeah, well, then maybe it's on the customer to discuss this with their manufacturer.
Well, clearly it's not going to change unless the customers change the behavior of the manufacturers. So, anyway, moving on to our first major story. This one comes from The Guardian, and this is a fascinating story here. So the title is, Company Loses $17 million in Email Scam. So there's this Omaha commodities trading company called Scholar, or Scholar Company. And apparently it's a 120-year-old company, pretty pretty well-established commodities trader. And wow, they got scammed pretty good. So some scammers apparently did a lot of homework about how this business or how this organization did their business, who their auditor was and whatnot. And essentially, the way this played out was the fraudster was sending emails to the controller of the company using the what appeared to be a personal email address of the CEO of the company, saying that, hey, we're buying this company in China, and I need your help to to fund the or finance the transaction. And the attacker had enough information about who the auditor of the company was that they were able to put this controller at ease. Basically, they were able to say, call our auditor. They'll walk you through the steps. And they gave the phone number. Apparently, the scam had it set up so that there was somebody, answered the phone with the name of the actual auditor that helped facilitate the the instructions. So anyway, they ended up stealing $17 million through 3 different transactions. And I guess at the end of the day, it looks like the controller is no longer an employee.
Because as I understand it, they actually told the controller to transfer this money to a bank account in China, and the controller thought he was doing what his boss had asked him to do. And in fact, I think they told the boss, or the fake email from the boss had said something along the lines of, "This is very hush-hush, so don't confirm this in a some way," which in retrospect looks obviously very suspect, but at the time was more than sufficient to convince this controller to do this as a legitimate transaction.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to find the exact quote. I think the alleged or the fake CEO said something to the effect of, if you discuss this with anyone, that's violating SEC rules or something to that effect. So, obviously it was a really good social engineering, or really well played social engineering attack, and they obviously did their homework. I gotta believe that they had some inside knowledge of the organization. Now, whether they obtained that through open source intelligence gathering, who knows how much they put out on LinkedIn, or whether there was malware on the administrative assistant's computer. Who knows, right? But they knew a fair amount to perpetrate this. So
you're saying it clearly must have been a nation state.
Obviously, there could be no other explanation.
I can't think of one.
I mean, it's either North Korea, China, or Iran, right? I think those are the...
Well, Russia and Liechtenstein, I think, are our usual suspects.
That's true.
Albania,
yeah. Good point. Yeah. Good point. So, this is a difficult one to guard against. Again, it comes back down to, maybe this is a place where training and awareness training can help, I guess. Obviously the first thing that stuck out to me is, the emails were being apparently coming from the CEO's personal address rather than his business email address. So that's, potentially one red flag that they could have used. But, it's not a technical attack.
Yeah, I think your best defense is something like this is business process, right? Some way saying that, the only way we are going to do a business transaction of this size is through this sort of mechanism, proactively saying that ahead of time. And if you get any other sort of request, no matter how legitimate, this is the process to confirm it, no matter what's said in the email.
Right.
And, that's the only way I think you're really going to, because in my mind, this is almost like a privileged insider attack.
Yeah.
In that, well-intentioned or otherwise, it wasn't malicious, but it sure as heck was a privileged insider. And what sort of controls are you putting around your privileged insider? And that is something that we've talked about a lot on this show, but I don't think we do well as an industry right now. Is we just sort of trust them blindly in many ways, and there's a lot of things that go into that. There's an ego issue that goes into that. There's an ease of getting work done issue that goes into that. But at the end of the day, you're talking a $17 million plus loss because there wasn't a business control around transferring money out, and this one controller had privilege to do it.
Yep. That's right.
And so similar thing you could say, abstracting that back to, I don't know, firewall auditing or firewall editing, right? You got one admin who has the rights to make a rule without anybody else looking at it.
Right.
You got a risk point there.
That's right.
But that is so common. That is how the vast majority of companies do it.
Yep. Absolutely. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting kind of departure from what we normally talk about. And it, like you said, it does point out some potential weakness that we should be paying attention to relative to process. So,
and it goes back to, social engineering is incredibly effective.
Absolutely. All right. So our next story comes from the New York Times, and the title is "Bank Hackers Steal Millions via Malware." Hey, boy, this is a pretty complicated story, and we actually have two sources for this. So the deal here is that, according to this article, Kaspersky is about to release a report tomorrow. So why we're talking about it today is an interesting thing, which basically says that a large number of global financial institutions were effectively robbed through malware. So the attackers got a malware footprint in these financial institutions, and then what I would characterize as leveraged business process attacks against these institutions. And clearly they had a technical component to it. Some of it was attacks on ATMs, and obviously they had to get the money out. So it's kind of interesting. There's not a lot of detail specifically, but in the next source we have, which is a report from Group IB and Fox IT, who apparently wanted to one-up Kaspersky, I guess, because this report's out today and Kaspersky's report's not coming out till tomorrow. They go into a lot of detail about exactly what happened. It's not exceedingly clear that it's the same issue, but I feel pretty confident that it is. Again, this started back in 2013, right? So apparently this has been going on for quite some time before people realized what was happening. And the attackers used, I would say, a number of interesting, although not necessarily surprising, techniques to get into the front door, right? So they used a combination of spear phishing and also what I would call, rummaging through botnets. So one of the, I guess, really three different ways. One is obviously spear phishing, which I just said. They also approached some major botnet owners looking through their list of IP addresses for their intended targets. So basically, are any of these targets financial institutions? And then they apparently also set up their own botnet for the purposes of finding financial institution hosts. And apparently, there's an allegation in here that the PHP.NET hijack, which we talked about a long time ago, was actually perpetrated by these people to get their malware out there. So anyway, lots of technical detail in here, but effectively what they were really after was implanting enough malware in the environment to, number one, obtain administrative credentials, number two, get a footprint on the organization's email server, and then number three, to get a footprint on the PCs of the people who do financial transactions.
And as well as apparently administer the ATMs.
Yes, exactly. And they used some techniques like remote access Trojans that call back out. They used some kind of legitimate tools like TeamViewer for their persistence. And it looks like they also used a lot of, I guess, what I would call, semi-legitimate things, in addition to some custom malware that one of which is called Anunnek, I guess, which packaged together some things like Mimikatz and a couple of other tools that allowed them to steal passwords. But ultimately, the whole point here was to enable the attackers to kind of end-to-end perpetrate a business process attack on the organization. So they were doing things like inflating the account values of a particular account holder. The example they gave was if somebody had $1,000 in an account, they would use the permissions of a person's computer they had hijacked to increase that to $9,000, and then they would cash out $8,000 through one of their ATMs or through transferring the funds to another bank account. But because they had access and control of their email system, which they said they had both, they had evidence of both Microsoft Exchange and Lotus Notes being owned. Apparently, they were equal opportunity attackers.
That tells me clearly their nation state, because if they put up with Lotus Notes, that is hardcore.
That is hardcore. Absolutely.
I mean, you've got to have military level discipline to deal with Lotus Notes.
No comment. So in any event, they clearly spent an exceeding amount of time, an extraordinary amount of time doing their homework. There was a lot of reconnaissance that this group put in. They kind of got into the environment. They established their foothold. They moved laterally, got control of the email server, got again onto these the workstations of key business people, and they used all of that access together to number one, understand the control environment, and then number two, to bypass it. So if they knew that a particular type of transaction would result in an email being sent to someone, they would cut it off. So it's really a very, I hate to say it, but it's kind of impressive. Another aspect that I actually wanted to talk about was apparently they also were changing firewall rules.
And yet, just to jump ahead in the story, the way this was discovered was by a malfunctioning ATM.
That's right.
Which led them to ask Kaspersky to come in to look at some malware. So all of this internal activity, all of this stuff going on, nobody noticed.
Their tactics were obviously highly effective. They spent, they spent a lot of time to be very deliberate, very cautious, very careful. This is the kind of thing where we all, or a lot of us, think about, this kind of attack being a possibility, but, we've never really thought that it actually happened or seen any evidence that it really happened, beyond kind of quote the nation state kind of thing. But here it is, right? And you have to wonder, how often is this stuff going on that we just don't hear about it? Because exactly like you said, they stumbled on it because of a stupid ATM. So,
well, and this, I think, is sort of getting minimal. Let me put it this way. I think we're at the tip of the news iceberg on this one. I have seen some estimates of up to $1 billion stolen through this campaign. Now, clearly, first reports are always suspect, and I'm not saying that that is the case, but this could end up being pretty big. There's some stuff apparently already floating around out there on the financial industry ISAC. There's some other stuff out there that apparently the FBI has been briefed. Some other Secret Service folks have been briefed, and apparently some U.S. banks may be involved. But these guys were incredibly patient and incredibly diligent in achieving the access they needed, and it was apparently very, very widespread. And this is the kind of stuff that we harp on this a lot, but any sort of internal monitoring, if you're not looking for these sorts of weird internal activities, profiling of your privileged users and what is normal behavior, looking for changes that weren't authorized, you're missing the way that most of these guys are running around laterally internally.
Right. Absolutely.
And this is the problem is that the vast majority of companies are in that same boat. They are not assuming breaches and they're not looking for it.
Right.
And it's frustrating.
And, I think also in that assume breach mindset, you also need to take at least some amount of a look at how dependent you are on pieces of technology that may also be compromised, like your email system.
True. If that is your control and you have this assumption that it is always, uncompromised, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. And, look, I've been doing incident response stuff for a long time, and there are certain circumstances where you don't want you want to stay off of email, right? You want to only be on the phone, and because you don't necessarily know that someone isn't in your email system, and that would tip your hand that you're onto them or whatever. But I think this is much more pervasive than that. I mean, this is way beyond that. This is, look at how your business process controls work, and look to see if there's a particular single point of, for lack of a better word, right? A single point of failure that could be part of a compromise like this. So, I think this is, like you said, this is going to be one we're probably going to be talking about for a while. I only got this report today, and I've read it twice, and I'm still finding new stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're definitely going to have to revisit this one as we go, as this particular story evolves. I can think of so many different things that, at least based on retrospect, would have at least keyed them off. But I think, once again, everybody's so busy just servicing requests and pushing packets that they are missing this sort of stuff.
Right.
And I something's got to change there.
Yeah, I suspect if you're a bank or a financial institution, your regulator's probably going to be talking to you about this one.
Okay, yeah, but then regulator comes in and says you need to do something. Okay, here's the problem with that in my mind. The regulator doesn't know your business model and your data and your business process well enough to give you procedural remediation. So it's more of a, what are you doing to stop this? And then it's the bank or financial institution showing to the regulator, well, we're doing X, Y, Z. And then it's, how well did you convince the regulator that you're actually doing that? You tell the regulator we're doing XYZ. Regulator says, prove it to me you're doing XYZ. Okay, you're doing XYZ, but is XYZ effective? The regulator doesn't know.
Right. That's right.
And so it's really incumbent upon the internal people who know the process, who know the business procedures, who know where their data lies, to be more diligent and to push for real security, not just, hey, we're compliant and the regulator's happy and we're making money.
Yeah. So that there's an interesting implication here, right? Because if it's $1 billion that was stolen, I don't know whatever amount was stolen, right? I've worked with banks. I've never worked for a bank. They don't really like it very much when, at the end of the day, numbers don't line up. And so maybe they didn't detect this, right? But apparently this was going on for close to 2 years. And I got to wonder, at some point, some numbers weren't balancing. And what the hell was going on there?
Or maybe the way that the bad guys were adjusting the numbers, like they said, was a method of abuse that were never considered by the bank.
Well, that's a great point. And I wonder if there were also balance sheets or other financial statements that they were also adjusting. I mean, because I gotta think that somebody somewhere in a bank would have found something not balancing.
Well, the vast majority of the assets are digital. So if I go into an account, like the example in the story is, and it's got $1,000 in it, and I edit the account and say, nope, now you've got $9,000. And I transfer the $8,000 out back to my original $1,000. That $8,000 kind of came out of thin air in some ways, even though it came off the bank. I don't know. I don't know enough about the internal banking regulations to be able to say, but maybe these threat actors did.
Given that this apparently was impacting at least 300 global financial institutions. This particular Group IB report is talking specifically about 50 Russian banks, but apparently there's quite a few more institutions involved than that. I mean, this sounded like quite a damn operation.
Yeah, I don't know.
So when by the way, I want to go back to the whole nation state thing. When we talk about, this thing was so complicated and so involved, it had to be funded by a nation state. This 300 different institutions, and this is one damn complicated attack being replicated that many times. That's a lot of resources, my friend.
Yeah, and by the way, the news specifically calls out that this probably wasn't a nation state.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So first of all, I'm gonna make the same comment I make when people say it is a nation state. How do you know? How do you know if it was or wasn't? I'm not, because I'm always pounding on folks who say, oh, it was a nation state. Well, just to be fair, I'm going to pound on these guys for saying it was a nation state. Again, how do you know? You don't, most of the time.
I suspect they're going by motive, right? Well, I mean, they've got to be, right?
I suppose, but yeah, it's like...
I know.
I'm trying to avoid getting off on that rant.
I know. Truther. You're a truther.
Clearly. I am. But all that being said, you would think that there would have been a control in the bank that would have picked this up.
Absolutely.
But clearly there wasn't. So...
Or there wasn't a control that this group wasn't able to monkey with. I mean, I think that's what it may come down to. Is that they spent so much reconnaissance time that they figured out what all those controls were, and they messed with each and every one.
Is it truly a control if the bad guy can mess with it?
That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. And I think that's a question we have to ask.
Are we putting too much trust in controls that can be monkeyed with?
Exactly. Right. Well, I mean, in this case, obviously they were. And, I suspect if you were to think about it, prior to this, it would seem so outlandish as to be written off as impossible. Okay, so you're going to tell me that somebody's going to compromise our network, they're going to take over control of our email system, they're going to be able to mediate, what goes through our email, they're going to be able to watch what's happening on our, on our computers, they're going to know, what spreadsheets to edit and all that stuff. No, that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen.
The flip side of this is you've now got some really well-trained potential employees you could hire who know your process and systems and could fit right into your organization and get things done for you.
You're always glass half full kind of guy, aren't you?
I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
Right. Well, we beat that one into the ground. We will be talking about that one again, I'm sure.
Yeah, to be continued, I'm sure.
So our next story comes from Ars Technica. The title is Pwned in 7 seconds. Hackers use Flash and IE to target Forbes visitors. So the deal here is that anybody who goes to Forbes.com knows very well that the first thing you get when you go to Forbes is a little blank gray screen with a quote of the day and an advertisement. Well, somebody, apparently a nation state, compromised the web server or web servers that serve up that initial splash page, and yeah, they ultimately redirected you to a website that was serving an exploit kit that used 2 0 days chained together, one for Flash and one for IE. And what was even more interesting is that apparently, and I haven't registered and proved that I am in the industry to download the technical details to find out, exactly how they know this, but it was only targeting the defense sector and the financial sector. So,
okay. And I'm guessing that was probably based on IP address origination.
Yeah, right. But I guess what I don't know is how they came to the conclusion that targeting was being done. So,
yeah, since like you, I didn't register to download it. My guess would be reverse engineering the malware.
Well, I don't think they had, they wouldn't have had the exploit kit. So the deal is that everybody was probably being redirected to the exploit kit, and the exploit kit was only, sending you the exploit code if you were on an IP address or otherwise targeted as or identified right. as a potential victim.
Right.
And so I don't know if they got that, the server side software. That's what I guess that's what I'm.
It could be. Yeah,
I'm not sure about.
I see what you're saying. But either way, it's a fascinating waterhole type attack.
But yet again, goes to show, this is a legitimate site. It's not, it's not shady wares or pornography or something like that. It's Forbes.com. But again, if you, they do link to a website that has a little bit of detail. And if you look at exactly how this, this happened, it wasn't being served directly off of the Forbes site. It took you to other sites. So there's an opportunity there, right? You can hopefully through web filtering block it. I haven't gone through and saw what those websites would have been classified as, and I certainly wouldn't have known at the time this was going on. But, hey, 0 days are real. They're out there.
Yep. And this is stuff as well that how quickly you patch comes into play. And if you're not patching, what are you doing to mitigate that risk in the meantime? And, I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, but in this particular case, I run an ad blocker that blocks that particular ad pop-up, but that's just luck in this case, right?
Right. But, more and more, that's looking like a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, as long as the bad guys haven't whitelisted it like everybody else.
Well, I agree with you there. That's fair point. Fair point.
So yeah, it is interesting. I don't know exactly how else to defend against that other than why are we still running Flash? Do we need Flash on our business machines?
Right. Right. But,
Other things?
I think there's a couple of things I want to point out. Number one is patching won't save your hide, right?
Correct.
And number two, antivirus won't save your hide. This would have worked on fully patched. This exploit would have worked on fully patched systems with whatever AV you wanted to be running, and it would still have gotten through. So
I'd be curious how something like a whitelisting software would have done against this, because it's molesting Flash and IE. Probably okay. We have to try it and see. If something like a Bit9 would have stopped this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's not a lot of discussion about what the actual payload was.
No, but what's interesting is one of the companies that is disclosing it, Invincia, makes technology that in essence assumes your browser is going to get popped and Flash is going to get popped and kind of virtualizes it and then relaunches that virtualized instance of the browser. So they're taking the approach of you can't stop it, let's just contain it to a certain extent, which I don't disagree with. I'm not endorsing Invincia, but the concept they're talking about I think is valid.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how mature their technology truly is. They're still pretty new, and it's pretty tricky what they're trying to do. But that being said, you can always look at, okay, who has the financial motivation to release this report to kind of get an idea what might be a valid defense against it.
True. But I think it is worth thinking about how you would protect against this. And this kind of goes back to something I talk about all the time. Unless you have some way that you can affirmatively assure yourself that you're not going to get hosed, you should do some kind of separation. Don't be browsing the web from a system that you're managing your mainframe with or whatever.
Why you got to make life so difficult for these people, man? They're just trying to do their jobs.
I know.
And you're just getting in the way.
I know. That's me, Mr. No. So moving on to our next story. This comes from CSO, and the title is 0 Days Last Up to 6 Months for Some Malware.
Right.
I have a little heartburn calling malware 0 day, but whatever. We'll get past that, right?
Let me just throw this out really quick. Full disclosure. Damballa was involved with this report. I used to work for Damballa many, many moons ago. So just for the record.
Okay. All right.
I try to be transparent.
No, good. That's good. So, without going into Damballa, I mean, it's an interesting report that I think we all hopefully intuitively understand. So their findings are that after 1 hour of discovery, they're saying that 70% of malware is not picked up by antivirus products. 24 hours later, antivirus only misses 34%. That drops down to 28% after a week. After a month, 7% was still missed, and it took 6 months to get to 100%. Which, that. I'm actually surprised that you get 100% after 6 months, to be candid.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when someone goes to 100%. So this was against 4 AV vendors. My takeaway from this is that, again, if you're relying upon AV as your only methodology, you're gonna get owned.
Right. It's things aren't like they used to be. The malware nowadays is they're like little puppy mills. They're all being customized, and you're not often getting the same thing that the guy down the street is. And so this is a really important thing to understand, that your antivirus is probably not going to save you.
Yep. And we'll see. That industry is trying really hard to be more relevant and pivot and, not be perceived as a waste of time to the organization. But it is a tough problem to solve. And the way fundamentally most AV solves it is limiting.
Right.
So, we're not going to get away from AV as much as people like to talk about it. At the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, compliance for many, many organizations still mandates AV. So that's just the way it's going to be.
I'll go back on my soapbox for just a second and tell you why I think AV is still useful, and that I think portends what you should look for when you buy AV. To me, AV is not about, the differentiator between one AV product versus another is about, it's not about whether it can catch, 31 or 32% of new viruses, because that's a stupid metric to compare against. The use of antivirus is, once I detect something in my network, how fast will my vendor reverse engineer that sucker and get some definitions back to me? Now, obviously, that's going to depend on how big of a customer I am, how big of an agreement, what level of support do I have, and things like that. But, keep in mind...
But aren't you also basing that entire thing on the fact that you've caught a sample of the malware somewhere?
Ah, an excellent observation.
Thank you. I try.
Yes, which is, I can't understate, I can't overstate that, right? That is so important that you're not getting the bang for your buck out of antivirus if you're not also having some proactive capability looking for this stuff. If your anti-malware solution involves the antivirus on your workstations, you're not doing what you need, right? You're beholden to this 34% after 24 hours. It's not going to do.
But so many organizations still have this belief system that the antivirus is a proactive system to stop malware on the way in. And very few organizations, relatively speaking, I think have the maturity to go be doing their own malware analysis and forensics enough to be able to provide valid samples to an AV company. So that's a pretty sophisticated organization that is actually able to participate in that sort of turnaround, I would think.
Absolutely. And, all I can say is, in the absence of that, consider what you're paying for. What are you need to really take a deep look at what are you getting, what you pay for, and does that change what your priorities are when you buy antivirus? How about that?
I think that's fair. It comes back down to, what are you intending the tool to do for you?
Yes.
In many ways.
Right. And all I'm saying is, think critically about what it can do for you and how you're going to use it, how it can benefit you, and what the value is. So that's what I'm saying.
I think that's fair.
Anyway, moving on to our last story. This is a kind of a whopper here. It's a follow-up to the Anthem breach. This is from Krebs on security, and the title is "Anthem breach may have started in April 2014." So this is it's a very long post, and I don't want to go through all of the gory details, but effectively Krebs explores some pretty compelling, what I would consider some pretty compelling indicators that this attack was associated with a APT. I need to come up with some music for APT, called dpanda. And they go through a number of reasons why they believe that, including the use of some Trojans and credential stealers that are also used in other campaigns. But I think even more interesting in this story are some of the other points about domain names. And so the way they came about this is a little convoluted, but basically there were back in April of 2014, there was a website called Wellpoint, but the L's were number ones, wellpoint.com. And by the way, Anthem used to be Wellpoint, changed their name. And apparently this person named Rich Barger, who works for Threat Connect, did some passive DNS research and effectively found out what appears to be whoever was using Wellpoint with ones instead of else had kind of mirrored their Wellpoints, at least some of their external DNS infrastructure. So things like myhr.wellpoint.com and hrsolutions.wellpoint.com and extcitrix.wellpoint.com. And even more interesting is that looking through VirusTotal apparently came up with a piece of malware which was masquerading as a Citrix VPN piece of software that had the extcitrix.wellpoint.com with 2 1s hard-coded in it. So, they don't actually give a smoking gun on, how those were actually used. Because apparently they're long gone at this point. But, there's one more thing. That Citrix VPN, the fake Citrix VPN software, was signed using a certificate that apparently was also used, known to have been used with other software by that Deep Panda Chinese espionage group.
Interesting.
QAPT music.
But we're still sort of assuming this all still began with a phishing attack, is what I surmise.
Yeah, well, they don't really go into exactly.
Yeah.
All they're saying here is that, hey, it's kind of interesting. We see, we're seeing this. And if I had to guess, that would kind of indicate that it probably, there was a phishing element to an attack. Whether that was an attack that resulted in what happened, don't really know. And then the article goes on, and apparently that in the process of doing this, they found some commonality with another attack, which I'm not even going to get into on this particular episode. But kind of an interesting new development, I think. Of course, everybody's nobody's talking about it that way, right? No, there's no confirmation or anything about this. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the tactics, right? So assuming that what they're describing here is real, and maybe that is how it happened. They're clearly the intention was, I think, to run a phishing campaign against the Wellpoint employees.
Yeah, it clearly has that feel. Or what about Wellpoint customers to a certain extent? Obviously, some of this was more employee focused, but some of it could have gone against customers, depending.
Well, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Things like MyHR and HR Solutions.
Yeah, that's clearly internal.
Well, it may be, but because I guess I don't know enough, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so think about how would you or your employees know if somebody was running a campaign like this against you? I can kind of envision in my mind what this would have looked like. Somebody probably got a hold of some emails or something like that and replaced the links. And if you're not really paying attention pretty close, even if you hover over the link, you might not recognize that those are 2 1s instead of 2 L's. So what do you do? And the best I could come up with, by the way, and it's ugly, is whitelisting on web access. But damn, that's painful.
Or don't click on a link ever, retype it. Which again, painful.
Yeah. And then there's that piece of malware that has, I guess I don't know specifically what that malware did, but the Citrix VPN software. I guess I don't have any real silver bullets for this, other than, if this is something that you're likely to be exposed to, you're going to have to think about different methods of mitigation. And there's lots of new email-based services that can help mitigate some of this stuff. And but there just isn't a silver bullet. I'm not convinced that user awareness is really going to help all that much here.
Yeah, I would probably look at more anti-phishing type technologies.
Right.
Those that might be able to scan links in emails, go and visit those websites, see what those websites are serving, try to determine if they're malicious in some way.
Right.
Maybe something that also some sort of sandbox technology that's looking at what's being sent down those links. Phishing works. We know it works. It's one of the most effective techniques. It's really tough to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. It sure is. And, this is clearly spear phishing taken to almost an extreme by setting up such a pretty close mirror of the infrastructure of the target company.
Yeah.
So, again, there aren't any, I wouldn't say there's any major revelations in this group, but, one of the points they bring out is that, hey, if this was, in fact, the Deep Panda Chinese APT crew, maybe the 80 million records that are alleged to have been lost weren't really lost to the bad cyber criminals. But it's probably a really bad thing if your name is among those people they were looking for.
Indeed.
I'm thinking. But, I started thinking a little bit about kind of the meta scale of this. If at some point I do wonder if there is some strategic benefit to a foreign country having, a pretty good mapping of personal data of all the citizens of an adversarial country. I can't come up with anything, right?
It's a reach. I suppose. The best way I could equate this back to a nation state doing this, if they wanted to have an independent source of funding that couldn't be traced back to government coffers, go about it as a criminal organization first and do this sort of typical identity theft, sell it online, make some money.
Right.
So you're completely off book. That's probably what I would guess if this were a nation state. But it just as likely could be a large criminal syndicate going after this information.
Yeah. There was another report that I don't have a link to right now, which basically said that there was an allegation here that Boeing was a big customer of Anthem, and they were after the employee information of Boeing. But
that's viable. We saw this with the RSA hack, that they went after RSA to find vulnerabilities in RSA's two-factor solution to go after defense contractors.
Right.
So if you're going to go multi-step, yeah, that is plausible in my mind.
Right. It's not very clear to me exactly what strategic benefit you have in that terms, because there's everybody in the U.S. has had their data stolen and published 8 times by now. I'm just not exactly sure what you gain by getting yet another copy of 80 million people's names, social security numbers, dates of birth.
Though the one thing that's kind of interesting is, instead of the default credit monitoring, Anthem apparently is doing something with identity theft protection services, which could be just a fancier name for credit monitoring. But it seems like they're trying to go beyond just simple credit monitoring with their "oops, we screwed up" sort of offering.
Yeah. I have to say, and I feel, I don't know how I feel about this, but they seem to be responding to this better than a lot of companies do. Or have.
I would hope by now that people have got a plan together before these things happen.
Yeah.
And they're learning from other people's mistakes.
Good point.
But I mean, that's again assuming a whole lot of competent leadership.
Good point. Good point. Well, this story is going to continue to develop for a while. I know there's a lot of lawsuits out there, and the state's attorney generals are apparently chomping at the bit because apparently Anthem hasn't gone through the formal process of notifying the state attorney generals. Although I'm not entirely sure what additional benefit comes to the people who were breached by them doing that. So I think it's kind of like a saber rattling type thing. But whatever. It'll be interesting to see if more detail comes out and we can, as a industry, learn from this. So anyway, that's the news. So
at least all the news that we've decided to talk about today.
Yeah, that's right. And dinner's waiting. So
that's right. The important stuff now. Dinner.
That's right. Time for the important stuff. So anyway, we, as always, we appreciate your time and listening to us. If you have any thoughts or opinions or feedback, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. I've tried to keep up with it, but now that we have more than about 40 listeners, it's getting a pretty swift volume of mail lately. So I try to keep up. If you like the show, give us a rating on iTunes. That helps us bump up the rating. By the way, there apparently is going to be a Jerry and Andy sighting on this week's episode of Paul's Security Weekly. So
really? No, nobody told me.
That's a bummer. Surprise! So that should be fun. Especially for those people who only know us by our voice, to all of a sudden be able to, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea at all. All of a sudden.
I have a face for podcasting. That's all I'll say.
I can relate. So, maybe we'll do like sock puppets in front of the webcam.
I love it.
So
that's the plan. I'll get my cat to sit in front of
there you go.
The camera.
There you go.
I'm sure he'll stay for approximately 1 minute.
And you can find the links to the stories we talked about at our website www.defensivesecurity.org. We have now 105 previous episodes for your listening pleasure, which should take you quite some time to get through at this point. Hopefully there's some good stuff in there. And with that, I think we will call it a night and talk to you again next week.
Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Take care. Bye.
I was stunned, by the way, that the bank hackers were not nation state. You even said in the article they likely were not a nation state. I didn't think you were allowed to even say that these days.
That's heresy.
Well, that author will be canned, or that reporter. Whoever wrote that story.
Totally.
Fired.
Blacklisted.
You can go right for BuzzFeed.
Top 10 articles for the rest of your life, son.
That doesn't work out. I'm sure TMZ needs somebody.
I mean, they've been dicking around with SSL since, what was that, October?
I've been dicking around with your mom for years.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
It's all about capturing mindshare.
That's not well written either.
Man, you want it well written and immediate?
I mean, it's pretty clear to me that they banged that thing out pretty in short order. So
I'm just not even going to bother.
Whatever. You're the FNG.
Yeah, seriously.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.